Number 10. Mysterious Roman relics found in Brazil. In the southeast of Brazil, there's a place called Guanabara Bay. It's close to Rio de Janeiro and is the second largest bay in all of Brazil. There isn't that much special about the bay, other than various relics from ancient Rome that were discovered 15 miles from the shore, buried under 100 feet of water. If you know anything about history, you'll know there should not be any ancient Roman artifacts anywhere near Brazil. The Romans never made contact with Brazil. They had no knowledge of South America at all, and yet the relics somehow made it across the world anyway. The strange archaeological discovery was made in 1976 by lobster divers, who discovered a jar encrusted with barnacles at the bottom of the bay. These turned out to be amphorae, ancient jars used by the Greeks and Romans to carry things like wine or grain during voyages across the sea. Then, in 1982, treasure hunter Robert Marks tried to find more precious objects. With permission from the Brazilian government, a team of experts began scanning the bay using sophisticated sonar technology. The team found over 200 more amphorae. Tests proved that they'd been down there in the muck for thousands of years. They probably came from the 2nd century Rome, even though the first Europeans didn't make it into Brazil until the year 1500. That would be about 1700 years after the jars were made. To this day, nobody has any idea how the mysterious jars made it all the way to Brazil. If a broken vessel had somehow gotten blown across the sea, or if Roman voyagers made it across the Atlantic but couldn't find their way back, nobody knows the truth. Number 9. Prehistoric animal carvings. For the first time in Scotland, prehistoric animal carvings have been discovered hidden inside an old burial cairn dating back 5,000 years. According to Historic Environment Scotland, the carvings were made inside Duncrege Cairn, one of the more famous burial sites in Scotland. The carvings come from either the Neolithic or early Bronze Age, and they show 2 red deer, which back then were the largest species of deer in the region. These deer were very important to the earliest Neolithic communities of Scotland. The ancient people ate their meat, used their hides to make shelter and clothing, and used their bones and antlers for tools and weapons. These carvings are now the oldest example of drawn animals by ancient people anywhere in the UK. They were scrawled on the capstone of the ancient burial chamber, suggesting whoever was buried inside was a respected member of the community and a skilled hunter of red deer. It's important to note that there are a lot of carved rocks in Scotland, about 3,000 that date back to prehistoric times. But these are mostly carvings of abstract rings and other strange symbols. Almost none of them actually depict living beings. Number 8. Elite women. Researchers from Spain recently analyzed the contents of a tomb discovered in 2014 at the archaeological site of La Amaloya. The person buried here belonged to the El Argar society that flourished between 2200 and 1550 BCE. They developed the first state organization anywhere in the Western Mediterranean. This newest study has proved that women may have played a crucial role in the governance of the civilization. Here's the deal with the burial. It was found to contain the body of a man between the ages of 35 and 40, and a woman between the ages of 25 and 30. Beside them was a pile of prestigious objects, many embellished with silver and almost all of them probably belonging to the woman. She was buried with a huge treasure of jewels and personal objects like necklaces and bracelets. She was also found with a silver diadem on her skull. Researchers have gathered that she was probably more important than the man she was buried with. Plus, researchers have already found other tombs containing what appears to be very rich women. All clues point to a society potentially ruled by wealthy females, perhaps making up the entirety of the dominant ruling class. Number 7. Golden Cannonball. Aaron Smith was exploring around Yorkshire in the British town of Whitby when he discovered a shocking golden cannonball with something even more amazing hidden inside. Aaron was only 22 years old when he made the discovery. After finding the perfectly round and very shiny ball, he realized all signs pointed to it containing a fossil. And Aaron is no noob when it comes to fossils. He hunts at least twice a week through local areas known to be rich in fossils. While the golden cannonball may have looked like a solid ball of metal, it actually opened quite easily. Aaron split the cannonball open to discover a fossil dating back 185 million years. The fossil was that of an ammonite. Ammonites were ancient cephalopods that lived between the Devonian period and the Cretaceous period, or 419 to 66 million years ago. They're frequently found fossilized on beaches throughout the world. Number 6. Mass grave in France. In France, archaeologists uncovered a mass grave between July and November of 2020. The grave dates back to the late Neolithic, between 3100 and 2900 BCE. The grave was discovered because of a project to create a bypass in the center of the country. According to the Archaeology News Network, this is the first collective burial from the late Neolithic found in the region. The burial itself makes up a rectangular pit, about 12 feet long and just shy of 6 feet wide. At some point, a rectangular wooden structure had held the bodies. The wood has long since decayed, though evidence of it remains. It had likely been some kind of burial box with a lid that allowed the ancient people to dump more bodies into the pit as need be. As of now, nobody really knows what culture the dead people belong to. There were at least 40 individuals found inside the grave, including adult, children, and teenagers. Number 5. Cattle bone carvings. Archaeologists have discovered what could be the oldest symbols ever drawn by human hand. They found a bone fragment riddled with 6 lines. The lines were engraved on the cattle bone 120,000 years ago. It was discovered by Israeli and French archaeologists at the ancient site of Nesher Ramla in Israel. According to Yossi Zedner, who was involved in the study, the lines could be the oldest symbolic engravings ever found on the planet. The discovery should help scientists to understand how symbolic expression developed in our species. The markings were found on one side of an otherwise undamaged bone, which has led researchers to speculate that the engravings probably held spiritual meaning. Nobody has any idea what 6 lines on an animal bone could possibly mean, but the symbols were definitely made on purpose. The type of cattle the bone came from is called an auroch, an ancient animal that went extinct 500 years ago. Flint tools were also found near the bone, which researchers say were probably used to make the engravings. Number 4. Knight's Arsenal. A man with a metal detector made a fascinating discovery in Europe. He found an arsenal of knights' weaponry left over from the biggest recorded battle that took place in medieval Europe. It's known as the Battle of Grunwald, and it was fought between the Polish-Lithuanian forces and the Teutonic Knights during the Teutonic War back in July of 1410. The battle itself took place in territory owned by the monastic state of the Teutonic Order. The order consisted of battle-hardened Germans and Prussians led by Grand Master Ulrich von Ugingen. But unfortunately for the Teutonic Knights, they were defeated and the Germans were seriously weakened by the loss. As for the discovery, it was found by Alexander Medvedev. He discovered part of a belt buckle, some knives, a sword, and a scabbard, with all the artifacts likely belonging to warriors who died during the battle. For those interested in tracking down even more amazing discoveries from the site of the battle, the exact location has not been given to the public. These weapons were still in shockingly good shape after being lost under a few inches of dirt for 600 years. Number 3. Shell bead currency. Archaeologists have discovered a very strange form of currency left behind by the Chumash Indians that once lived in the region around what is today Santa Barbara. The currency comes in the form of beads, with the beads being crafted from olive sea snails. According to Professor Lynn Gamble from the University of California, these beads were used for currency during a span of around 1,000 years, starting around the 1st century AD. In other words, the Chumash were using beads as money 2,000 years ago. This dramatically changes our interpretation of these ancient people, who we thought were simple hunters and gatherers may have actually been part of a complex economic society. Also, this could be the first example of money being traded in the Americas from 2,000 years ago. But how do we even know these beads were used as money and not just as decoration? First of all, large amount of beads were found on single individuals buried thousands of years ago, suggesting they hoarded their money. These beads are also significantly larger and more standardized than those used as decoration. This means they were all made to be of equal value. Nobody knows exactly how much a single bead was worth or what it was traded for, but professional archaeologists are starting to accept that the ancient people in the Americas may have had their very own system of currency. Number 2. Crystal Dagger. A very rare crystal dagger has been discovered in a prehistoric tomb, and it dates back 5,000 years. The discovery was made in Spain by a team excavating an ancient tomb in prehistoric Iberia. What's truly fascinating about the dagger is that it's not made of the traditional stone or flint. It was instead crafted from a special rock crystal. The dagger is about 8.5 inches long and was discovered alongside 10 arrowheads and a small stash of blades, all of them made from rock crystal. Researchers have suggested that whoever owned these weapons paid a hefty price for them. They had likely been an elite individual, possibly a leader or a renowned warrior. Even more interesting is that researchers say the crystal dagger may have been viewed as a magical item. Rock crystal weapons may have been thought by the ancient people to possess powers of vitality. They could have also been used in special rituals. So far, experts don't know exactly who wielded the crystal dagger or how many of them were ever made, or really what culture this person was even a part of. Number 1. Roman Love God. During the construction of a highway in southwestern England, archaeologists stumbled upon an ancient figurine of an old Roman god. The figurine is in the shape of Cupid, and it dates back 2,000 years. According to Smithsonian Magazine, the figure was also found with a brooch in the shape of a bow, yes, just like Cupid's bow, and a human skeleton. What you might be surprised about is that at least 50 other Roman Cupid figurines have already been found in the United Kingdom. Thousands of years ago, Cupid was kind of a big deal. The winged god of love was beloved by pretty much everyone. After all, if you had to follow one of the old gods, it might as well have been Cupid. But this discovery yielded some other strange results. For example, the skeleton was discovered buried face down. This was normally a sign of disrespect for the dead, something reserved for criminals or a person disliked by their community. At the same time, the figurine and the ornate brooch were quite sophisticated, suggesting they had been owned by an individual of great wealth. As of right now, nobody knows who this person was or why they were so hated to be buried with their face in the dirt, and truth be told, we may never know. Which of these crazy discoveries was your favorite? Number 10. The Moche. The Moche culture flourished in Peru on the northern coast beginning in the year 200. There isn't a lot known about this mysterious ancient culture, other than they rose and fell surprisingly quickly, just before the famous Inca rose to power. The Moche left behind no written record to tell of their beliefs or traditions. By the time the Spanish arrived, the Moche territory had already been allocated by the Chimul people. What makes the Moche culture even harder to understand is the fact that in the early 20th century, there was little to no proper archaeology going on in Peru. Many of the artifacts recovered from graves and ancient sites were taken into private collections with no context. Despite this, historians have been able to put together a few clues about the Moche based on the remaining ruins and the few pieces of architecture still standing. We know the Moche were divided into independent areas, along the northern coast and southern coast, with no political organization. There was no monarch or empire to speak of, but instead small autonomous groups that shared culture. The biggest piece of Moche architecture still standing is the Huaca del Sol, a pyramid structure on the Rio Moche. Then there's the Huaca de la Luna, which contains colorful murals drawn by the Moche. We're not sure what these people believed in or what they did, other than craft ceramics and practice agriculture. Scientists believe the Mochi were finally wiped out between 536 and 594 during a super climactic event that caused 30 years of flooding followed by 30 years of drought. Number 9. The People of the Cliffs. In the American Southwest, there was once a mysterious race of people who dwelled within the desert cliffs. The rock-cut city of Mesa Verde was home to a people known as the Anasazi during the 13th century. In Spanish, Mesa Verde translates to green table, and in the Navajo language, Anasazi translates to the Ancient Ones. Much like other mysterious cultures that vanished without a trace, the Anasazi never left behind any writings about themselves. It's believed they never developed a written system, though they undoubtedly had their own system of language. What they did leave behind was a fascinating rock city containing over 150 rooms, more of a palace carved into the cliff than anything else. The cliff ruins left over by the Anasazi are just as amazing as any other archaeological ruins in the world. According to Life Science, recent research has unveiled that the Anasazi may have had sophisticated mathematical understanding. It's possible they used similar mathematical ratios that helped the Egyptians to construct the pyramids at Giza. However, historians can't agree on how they came to learn such complicated math when they couldn't even develop the written word. These people lived in an area of about 10,000 square miles, territory that encompassed parts of Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico. What's really strange is that the people here just vanished without a trace after doubling in population between the years 700 and 850. But then, between 850 and 930, the Anasazi disappeared into thin air, and scientists have never figured out why. Number 8. The Vikings of Greenland. Some of the first people to ever occupy Greenland were the ancient Vikings. This cold and vast primordial land was settled by Norse warriors in the 10th century. Vikings lived here for about 400 years, give or take a year or two. There are still ruins of churches built by the Norse settlers in Greenland. But what scientists and historians have been struggling with is the fact that Vikings gave up their settlement in Greenland in the 14th century and never bothered to return. For a race of people who wanted more territory and more security, it seems silly that they would have given up a perfectly good colony for no reason. Historians have long purported that the Viking settlements in Greenland were abandoned because of climate conditions. The weather got too cold and the Norse settlers left. But a new theory says this isn't the case. Nicholas Young from Columbia University believes there was no climate change that affected the colony. By analyzing isotopes in boulders taken from Greenland and Baffin Island, scientists have determined that Greenland was cold when the Vikings arrived and it was still cold when they left. So why did they leave? They had livestock, there was hunting, and they even exported goods like walrus ivory to Europe. A new theory says the Vikings may have been at war with the native Inuit, and they lost, while another theory says it was actually the Black Death that killed all the Vikings. Number 7. The Olmec. The Olmec was the first major society to live in Mexico. Forget about the Maya, they came much later. The Olmec lived throughout the Gulf of Mexico, in the modern states of Tabasco and Veracruz from between 1600 BCE to 350 BCE. In the Aztec language, Olmec means rubber people. Scientists believe the name comes from the fact that the Olmec were the first ones who figured out how to convert natural latex from the rubber tree into something that could be used as a building material. The Olmec were surprisingly advanced. They didn't have a writing system like the Romans, but they did create glyphs and symbols that they probably used as some sort of written communication, though archaeologists have never been able to decode the glyphs. The most famous constructs left behind by the Olmec people are giant heads which they carved from basalt rock. Some of these stone heads are up to 20 tons heavy. It's believed they were crafted to commemorate the mighty rulers of their civilization. Most of the Olmec lived in small villages and towns, though there were two urban centers called San Lorenzo and La Venta, which were used mostly for ritual purposes. Even though the Olmec didn't leave behind any written accounts of their beliefs, judging by the artwork left behind, historians have been able to figure out that they worshipped some kind of shark monster, a maize deity, and a rain spirit in the form of a human-jaguar hybrid. Number 6. The Oxumite. The Kingdom of Aksum is located in modern Ethiopia, specifically the northern Tigray region. It was a major civilization and a huge power during the first centuries of the Common Era. The Kingdom of Aksum had a far-reaching influence, touching parts of Arabia, Egypt, and even all the way to the Far East. The kingdom reached its peak during the 4th century. They had the only written script in all of Africa, they were the strongest trading empire in the region, bartering with the Mediterranean and Arabia, and Aksum was even described as one of the 4 great powers on the planet at the time. Despite this, very little is known about Aksum today. There are no histories, legends, or detailed descriptions that speak of what went on inside the kingdom. And to be honest, most of what we know actually comes from the Greeks and the Romans and their descriptions of Aksum. What we do know is that Aksum was one of the first great kingdoms to embrace Christianity in the 4th century. Even Judaism managed to take hold in the kingdom, unlike anywhere else in Africa. Back in the 1980s, Israel even worked to move the Jewish population out of Ethiopia to Israel. Number 5. The Kushite. The Kingdom of Kush is another mysterious civilization that had a huge impact on history and is virtually unknown today. The kingdom was located in what is now northern Sudan. It was part of Nubia, a great land that stretched all across the North Nile to the Red Sea. The culture flourished and thrived for over 3,000 years, shaping much of the cultural landscape of northeastern Africa. We know the Egyptians often warred with the Nubians. We also know the Kushite people in Nubia relied heavily on trade. They had a cosmopolitan trading center from which they exchanged goods with much of the African interior, the Arabian desert across the Red Sea, and even the Mediterranean basin. They traded gold, ivory, exotic animals like monkeys and elephants, and in exchange, they often imported things like bronze and oil. But the Kingdom of Kush is a little more complicated than that. According to the National Geographic Society, there were actually 3 distinct kingdoms here with 3 different capitals. The most famous is undoubtedly Meroe, where even today there are over 250 pyramids around the ancient city. There are more pyramids here than in all of Egypt, and just like the Egyptian pyramids, these were built as tombs. There were dozens of kings and queens and nobles buried here, though most of their grave goods and corpses were already pillaged before modern archaeology. The big difference between the pyramids of Meroe and the pyramids of Egypt are size and style. The Nubian pyramids are smaller, pointier, and made of pure black stone. Number 4. The people of the Mississippi. One of the most ancient and mysterious civilizations that ever lived in North America resided along the Mississippi. These were Native Americans who built pyramids and observatories and even practiced human sacrifice. They rose to power in the Mississippi Valley in what is today Illinois back in 700 AD. They thrived until about 100 years before Columbus stumbled upon America, though why exactly they vanished is still something of a mystery. The most populous city of the Mississippi people was Cahokia, with a population of about 15,000. For back then, that was pretty impressive. It was actually the largest city north of Mexico prior to Europeans. It consisted of 120 earth mounds, with each mound boasting a pyramid with a flat top, where the leaders of society lived. There was also a vast plaza in the very center of the city used for trade and probably religious activities. Along the outskirts of the main city, there was a rich agricultural belt used to feed those who lived in the area. The civilization was also advanced, with a system of government, a hierarchy of religious leaders, and plenty of skilled craftsmen and even astronomers. However, the great city of Cahokia and its people suffered probably because of an environmental disaster. The first people from the outside world to discover Cahokia was a French explorer in 1673. He found the city deserted and apparently vacant already for 300 years. Not even the local indigenous groups had any knowledge of who built the abandoned city or where they went. Number 3. The Sila. Between the 1st century BCE and the 7th century AD, Korea was ruled by the Sila kingdom. Sila was at war with the neighboring kingdoms for most of their rule, though they did finally conquer each of their neighbors and unite the Korean peninsula in 668 AD. For the next almost 300 years, the United Sila Kingdom was a singular Korea, and one of the most devastating powers anywhere in Asia. What's really interesting is just how the Sila Kingdom rose to power. According to the World History Encyclopedia, it all started when tribes from southeastern Korea formed a type of confederacy. The leaders of this confederacy were nothing more than community shamans. They imposed an inheritance system of rule, meaning leadership passed on from father to son. They also began battling and absorbing weaker confederations. Their true rise to power was helped by China, which was ruled by the Tang dynasty at the time. With China's help, the Silla crushed each kingdom to finally unite the peninsula in 668. Like most ancient civilizations, Silla tore itself apart after taking control of the region. Civil war and political unrest fractured the kingdom, and it eventually fell, giving rise to the Goryeo Kingdom in 918. Number 2. The Not Chico Civilization. The Not Chico Civilization is the oldest known society anywhere in North America or South America. It originated in the year 3500 BCE, around the same time that the Egyptians were building their pyramids, and 2,000 years before the Olmec civilization of Mexico that we spoke of earlier. They survived for quite some time, living in northern Peru until about 1800 BCE. At its peak, there were about 30 major population centers, most of them clustered around 3 large river valleys. The Norte Chico culture left behind impressive architecture, from huge platform mounds to the ruins of complex plazas. They had no writing system, though archaeological evidence suggests that they may have figured out how to craft textiles, and that they worshipped a single common god. But because the civilization is so old, and so many others were built on its bones, nobody has been able to figure out how it was organized, what its political system looked like, or how the society functioned. But what's really incredible is that, so far, there has been no evidence that the Norte Chico civilization engaged in violence. There have been no weapons found, there is no evidence of fought battles, and, so far as historians can tell, this is one of the only legit peaceful societies that ever prospered in the history of the human race. Number 1. The Jiahu culture. The Jiahu culture is believed to be one of the oldest from China. Almost nothing is known about these ancient people. The only reason scientists even know they existed is because of excavations that came from an archaeological site in the Henan province, in which scientists discovered human occupation dating back 9,000 years. At the Jiahu site, archaeologists found the oldest crafted wine in the world, ancient musical instruments, and the earliest known example of Chinese writing. There were also ruins found of houses, tools made from both stone and bone, and all the telltale signs of a functioning complex society. And this was 9,000 years ago, way before the Egyptians even thought about building pyramids. It's not clear how exactly these people got here, where they came from, or how they managed to progress so much faster than other places in the world. Everything they did was advanced, from their architecture to their art. But because they didn't leave behind any written accounts of their beliefs or systems, historians haven't had much to go on. We know this was probably the cradle of civilization for Asia, and definitely the start of the great empire that is today China. But how? Well, that's still a mystery. Which of these civilizations do you find the most fascinating? Number 10. Okiku. In 1918, a young man in Japan purchased a doll as a gift for his younger sister, Okiku. She was just 2 years old at the time he gave it to her. The doll was about the average size of any doll you might see a little girl holding today. It was dressed in a traditional kimono, and it had raven pitch black hair. It was quite the doll, and he was excited to see his sister's face light up when he gave it to her. He rushed home and presented his present. It became her all-time favorite toy. She took the doll everywhere with her. In fact, she hardly ever put the doll down. Okiku had a best friend in the form of a mini girl. It was only a short year later that disaster struck. In 1919, Okiku tragically died of the heinous illness yellow fever. It was a horrendous death, with Okiku suffering until the very last breath she took. And also, until that very last breath, She was with her favorite doll. The family had intended to bury the doll with the little girl, but instead it ended up at the family altar. This was a common practice in Japan, in which families would build a small shrine to commemorate the dead. That was when some pretty weird stuff started happening. The family began to have creepy dreams of Okiku. Sometimes they would even wake up with the doll beside them, the lights would flicker on and off, and strange noises would sound throughout the house. They even noticed that the doll's hair appeared to be growing. Her hair was once shoulder length and smooth, but it grew past her waist and had a rough texture. They eventually learned that their daughter's soul had become trapped inside the doll. The family ended up moving away years later, and were afraid that the doll's magical powers were linked to their daughter's nearby grave. They decided to let the doll stay at a temple with priests and be close by to the cemetery. Today, the doll is still holding on to Okiku's soul. It's located in the small town of Iwamisawa, held in a private shrine and hidden inside of a small wooden box. Number 9. The Shop Ledger. Back in 1988, when Tony Benovitz was demolishing his shop in England, he discovered a ledger bricked inside the wall. The ledger was from 1915 and in surprisingly good shape. However, after taking the ledger home to check it out, strange things started happening to Tony and his family. His daughter would see images appear as if by magic in her bedroom rug, including the eerie shapes and smiles of men and children. Everyone in the house reported having ghoulish encounters with what they described as haunting spirits. Totally freaked out, Tony took the ledger to one of the most haunted places in all of England, Preston Manor. As an historical item and one that was apparently haunted, Paula Wrightson with the manor was happy to check it out. She took the mysterious ledger from the family and put it on her desk and left it there for a few weeks. She later had a medium come and inspect the book, who said bad things were emanating from it. But just what exactly is inside the ledger? Really, nothing interesting. Just an exact log of what was sold in the shop a century ago. Other than that, it's completely normal. But still, anyone who spends too much time with the book ends up getting freaked out and wanting nothing to do with it. We just can't figure out why in the world it's haunted. Do you have any ideas? Number 8. The Great Haunted Bed. In the small town of Ware, there's a famous bed. It's called the Great Bed of Ware, and people come from all over the world to take pictures of it. This bed is absolutely massive, big enough for 6 couples to sleep comfortably. It might also be a little haunted. The bed was constructed in 1463 by Jonas Fosbrook and given over to the royal family in England. It was an absolute behemoth and very much impressed King Edward IV. So much that he gave the builder a very generous pension to see him through the rest of his life. Eventually, as the years went on, the bed was given to the Lord of Ware Manor, who gifted it to various inns in the town, where people could pay huge amounts of money to look at and even sleep in the bed. But apparently, anyone who slept in the bed wound up having a horrible night. They would experience scratching sensations. They would feel as if they were being pinched and kicked. They would sweat through their clothes, have horrible nightmares. It was just a really terrible experience overall. Some even woke up the next morning covered in bruises and completely drained of emotion and energy. To this day, nobody knows why the bed is so haunted. It could be the builder haunting the bed for an unknown reason, or it could be a completely random poltergeist. Why do you think this massive bed is haunted? Let us know in the comments down below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Number 7. The Coronor Diamond. The Kohls is one of the strangest diamonds in the entire world. According to the BBC, it has been around for centuries and has cycled between ancient Iranian warriors, Mughal princes, and even Punjabi Maharajas. It's a beautiful gemstone, 105 carats, and it fell into the hands of the British in the 19th century. Now, the diamond is part of the Crown Jewels and is housed at the Tower of London inside an impenetrable fortress. The first mention of the diamond is from somewhere around 1300, when it was allegedly stolen from the Raja of Malwa in what is modern India. Ever since, it has brought misery and misfortune to all those who have owned it. But actually, not everyone. Women are apparently able to wear the diamond with impunity. It's only the men who came into possession of the diamond by means of war who suffered the misfortune. After the diamond was captured by the East India Company in 1851, they handed it over to Queen Victoria. Everyone was aware of the curse, but no one could give up such a precious jewel. So it made more sense to give it to the Queen rather than risk any kind of trouble befalling the male heir to the British throne. It's been kept in the hands of a woman ever since. Number 6. Forbidden Mummy. In 1972, 8 mummies were discovered inside a pair of tombs in Greenland. The mummies were incredibly well preserved, still having their hair, eyebrows, fingernails, and skin. They became known as the Killikitsak mummies, named after the abandoned Inuit settlement where they were discovered. The youngest corpse found here was that of a 6-month-old child. According to the scientists who investigated the petrified remains, the child had mysteriously been buried alive. Oddly enough, the infant was actually the most well-preserved out of all of the mummies found. Archaeologists say it's probably because he froze quicker than his family members. Nobody knows why he was buried alive, although it's been suggested that he was buried with his dead mother to make sure they were able to enter the afterlife with one another. The child's horrifying corpse hasn't caused any paranormal abnormalities that we know of, but it's honestly so scary to look at that one glance will leave you haunted for the rest of your life, seeing only its empty eye sockets and stretched skin each time you dream. Number 5. The hands resist him. In the year 2000, an anonymous seller began an auction for what was labeled a haunted painting. In the advertisement, there was a warning to all potential buyers that the painting boasted supernatural powers, and the person selling it had suffered nothing but misery since it came into their possession. The seller claimed the picture would change form at night, with the dolls in the painting actually coming to life. Just days after the painting appeared online, stories started coming in of people having horrible reactions from just looking at the picture on their screen, from people fainting to children screaming. Nobody knows why the painting is so horrifying or how it exercises so much power over people. What we do know is that the bid shot from $200 to over $1,000 before it was eventually sold. The buyer later said that they never experienced any strangeness themselves, though people who looked at the painting would often experience gut-wrenching fear for no apparent reason. Would you ever hang up a painting in your house that was potentially haunted? Number 4. The British Museum's artifacts. The British Museum hosts literally tens of thousands of different artifacts, and apparently some of them might be a little haunted. It's been reported that inside the British Museum at night, people have witnessed specters. They felt sudden drops in temperature, and they've heard inexplicable noises. The security staff who patrol the enormous museum and the most popular tourist attraction in all of Britain do so using flashlights. They walk through the halls looking for water leaks, making sure nobody got left behind, and sometimes witnessing paranormal activity. This shouldn't be a big surprise. There are 94 rooms open to the public, and many more artifacts from all around the world secreted away behind locked doors. Some of these artifacts have ghoulish stories and history, or are just completely terrifying to look at in general. One night, one of the guards witnessed, for just a split second, the figure of a 2-headed dog. He attributed his sighting to a wooden Congolese fetish from the 19th century that seemed to exude some kind of mysterious power. The fetish bristles with wrought iron nails, and apparently when a security guard pays a little too much attention to the odd artifact, the fire alarms sometimes go off like some kind of creepy warning. Number 3. Cursed Chest. Speaking of a museum with haunted artifacts, the Kentucky Historical Society has a unique relic associated with at least 18 deaths. On the outside, it looks just like a simple chest of drawers. It's called the Conjured Chest, and it was donated to the museum back in 1976 after haunting the Maine family for generations. The chest was probably made around 1830 in Kentucky and was carved by hand by a slave named Remus. But so far as the story goes, the man who had the chest commissioned was not happy with it, and so he beat the slave to death. To get revenge on the brutal murder, a group of African-American slaves sprinkled dry owl blood in the drawers and cursed the chest. From then on, anyone who put their clothing in the chest suffered misfortune and usually died not long after. The first to perish was the child whom the chest was made for. She actually died in infancy. Then, the murderer who killed Remus And then his nephew died after placing his clothes in the chest. This went on until the chest found its way to the main family. 18 very unfortunate people were dead by the time the family caught on and stopped letting people put clothing inside the chest. Now it's locked up tight in the Kentucky Historical Society. No one is allowed to store anything inside of it. Number 2. Pompei Artefacts. About 15 years ago, a troublemaking tourist stole fragments from the ancient city of Pompeii while on vacation. She was a poorly behaved Canadian woman, and she recently even sent the artifacts back to Spain after claiming her life had been made absolutely miserable ever since stealing them. She went so far as to claim the fragments were cursed. What exactly were these fragments of? Well, they were simple mosaic tiles, pieces of ceramic that she had taken when in her early 20s back in 2005. Upon returning from that trip, she experienced several years of intense suffering, including getting breast cancer twice and experiencing horrible financial ruin. Broke and defeated by her illness, she sent the mosaic tiles back to Italy with a note reading, "Please take them back, they bring me bad luck." Whether these tiles really were cursed or her life just sucked because of karma, well, we may never know. Number 1. The Haunted Staircase. At the Queen's House, there is a haunted staircase. If you're not sure what the Queen's House is, it was once a royal residence for the British monarchy, built between 1616 and 1635 in the City of London. Today, it's a museum. But the story of the haunted staircase goes back to 1966, when a Canadian man visited the house and took a picture of the famous tulip staircase. At the time, everything seemed perfectly normal. It wasn't until the tourist got home and started going through the film that he realized he had taken a photograph of a ghostly figure hanging on the rails of the staircase, as if about to be sick. After the incident, the tourist swore nobody else was on the staircase at the time. When he took the photo, the staircase was completely empty. The next year, in 1967, a paranormal investigation organization called the Ghost Club went to the Queen's House to see what they could find. However, they never actually produced any real evidence of the paranormal. Surprise, surprise. Ever since then, though, there have been occasional people who witnessed something that may be a ghost, and to this day, people swear an unknown spirit is haunting the staircase, though nobody could say why he's choosing to hang out there or why he appears to be sick. Thanks for watching. Which of these creepy artifacts freaked you out the most? Tell me your thoughts in the comment section below, and be sure to hit the subscribe button if you liked the video for even more awesome content. See you next time. Bye-bye. Number 10. Moira Murray. The case of Moira Murray is nothing short of tragic. She was only 21 years old after she mysteriously vanished off the face of the earth. It happened in 2004 in New Hampshire. On the evening of February 9th, Moira crashed her car while driving along a country road. The last person to see her alive was a school bus driver who stopped and offered Moira a hand. Instead, Moira waved him off and said she'd be okay by herself. She was calling AAA. But being the kindly man that the bus driver was, he phoned the police anyway. He knew there was no cell service and that Moira was probably worried because she was alone. By the time the police arrived at the scene, Moira was gone. Her car was locked and turned around to face the opposite direction of where it had originally stopped. There was no trace of her, or of anybody else. Over 17 years later, and not a single clue has come to light regarding Moira's case. Nobody knows if somebody snatched Moira off the side of the road, if the bus driver himself kidnapped Moira, or if she simply wandered off through the snow or was eaten by a bear. According to the New Hampshire Attorney General's office, the case is still an open investigation, and they are still urging anyone with any information to come forward and contact the New Hampshire State Police. Some still hold out hope that Moira will return one day. Others are sure she's gone, buried, or otherwise lost to the world. Number 9. The sleepy sickness. There was once a sleeping sickness epidemic that transformed its victims into human statues, completely speechless and unable to move. To this day, scientists can't understand or explain what caused the mysterious sickness. It all began after World War I. The sleeping disease, also known as lethargic encephalitis, affected millions of people all over the world. There are various estimates, but it's agreed that roughly 1 million of those inflicted with the sickness died, and others spent the remaining years of their life stuck in a living coma. Believe what you will, but this is one of the biggest medical mysteries in history, and almost nobody even knows it happened. The illness spread across the world at roughly the same time that the Spanish flu was busy killing over 50 million people. This could be why the sleeping sickness went so unreported back in its day. After all, until the coronavirus pandemic, almost nobody even talked about the Spanish flu recently. The sleeping sickness began in 1915, with the first patients being soldiers displaying lethargy and extreme confusion in Paris. People of all ages were affected. The initial symptoms were similar to the flu, and by the time the encephalitis had seized hold of their minds, it was too late. The brains of the infected became so inflamed that they were turned into brainless zombies. The lucky ones were those who died. And to this day, scientists can't figure out what caused the sleeping sickness or how it was transmitted from person to person. Number 8. Walter Collins. It was March 10th, 1928, when Walter Collins disappeared from his neighborhood in Los Angeles. He was only 9 years old at the time. The local police searched for Walter for 5 months, even investigating a nearby lake where some eyewitnesses claimed to have seen the boy. They came up with nothing. Then in August, Walter walked into a police station in Illinois, stated who he was, and was quickly brought back to Los Angeles. Here's where the mystery really begins. Christine Collins knew immediately that the boy was not her son. Being the 1920s, the captain of the LAPD simply told Christine Collins that the boy was of course her son, and that he only looked different because he had matured a bit. As a mother who was being told this boy was her son, Christine was obviously being hysterical. The LAPD captain, one J.J. Jones, even told Christine to take the boy home and just try him out for a couple of weeks. Imagine hearing that today. Things kept getting crazy. Christine gathered her son's dental records along with groups of her friends who knew the real Walter personally. J.J. Jones wasn't having any of it. Instead of listening to the evidence, he claimed Christine didn't want to take care of her kid and was trying to get rid of him. He even had her committed to the psychiatric ward at the Los Angeles County General Hospital. While Christine was in the hospital, her story turned out to be true. The imposter eventually admitted that his real name was Arthur Hutchins Jr., a boy from Iowa who ran away and tried to take Walter Collins' place because the two looked somewhat similar. Still, it wasn't until 10 days after Arthur's confession that Christine was finally released from the psychiatric ward. She later received $10,800 in court on the account of her being falsely imprisoned and all. To this day, nobody knows what happened to the real Walter Collins. Number 7. Paula Jean Welden. The last words ever spoken by Paula Jean Welden were, "I'm gonna hike on the long trail." Paula was 18 years old, just a sophomore at college up in Bennington, Vermont. It was December of 1946, and about 2:45 p.m., she decided to go hiking on the long trail. That was over 60 years ago, and she still hasn't been found. When Paula was last seen, she was wearing nothing but jeans, lightweight sneakers, and a thin red coat. Eyewitnesses remember that she didn't look dressed properly for the cold winter weather. A man named Louis Knapp picked up a young girl hitchhiking along Route 67A who matched the description of Paula. He dropped her off near Long Trail, where she was subsequently witnessed at least 45 minutes later in the area of Brickford Hollow, where residents saw her heading towards the trail. One man even recalled warning Paula that it was dangerous to head up into the mountains dressed in such a way, and at such a late hour. But she went anyway into the dimness of the woods and never was seen again. Nobody knows what happened to Paula. Her body was never found, she was never spotted again, and her unusual behavior on the day of her disappearance has yet to be solved. She clearly knew that going into the mountains not prepared for the cold was a bad idea. What was she thinking? And more importantly, did she make herself disappear on purpose? Number 6. The Bridge of Horror. In Scotland, there's a mysterious bridge that has been luring animals to their deaths. According to those who have lost their pets at this very bridge, something simply comes over them when they get too close to it. Hundreds of Scots have claimed that their dogs become possessed by an indescribable energy at the bridge, then try their hardest to throw themselves off the stones, where many of them ended up dead in the valley below. It has been going on since the 1950s, though the bridge itself, called the Overton Bridge, was built at least a century prior. The bridge is located in Dumbarton, and depending on who you ask, it's haunted by a malevolent force straight out of the Twilight Zone. Here's where the mystery gets really spooky. The bridge is in a location described by the pagan Celts as Thin Place. A thin place is supposedly where heaven and earth overlap, creating a kind of paranormal zone. This is what the superstitious residents of Dumbarton say is responsible for all the doggy deaths. According to the New York Times, anywhere between 50 and 600 dogs have died by flinging themselves off this mysterious bridge, supposedly compelled by an unseen and possibly evil force. Number 5. The Georgia Guidestones. It was June of 1979. A man under the false name of R.C. Christian approached the Elberton Granite Finishing Company about building him a monument. He was to remain anonymous throughout the entire process, and so too was the group he represented. He had all kinds of money to fund the project, he was able to complete all the legal contracts seamlessly, and all information about him and how the project was even accepted by local government and put forward was withheld from the public. A year later, the Georgia Guidestones were finished. They were placed in a seemingly obscure part of Georgia with absolutely no significance, erect on a hill for all to see. The stones are engraved with 10 guidelines, rules which seem to have been made up to be implemented after an apocalypse. They are written in English, Spanish, Arabic, Chinese, Russian, and others. One of the most bizarre guidelines is that humanity is to remain under 500 million, meaning the total population of humans on Earth should not surpass that number. To this day, nobody knows who built the Georgia Guidestones or what their true purpose is. They could have been constructed by Satanists, those working with the New World Order, or an organization so secretive we don't even know about them yet. Regardless, I kinda wanna go see them myself. Don't you? Why or why not? Let me know in the comments below, then remember to subscribe to Talltanic if you haven't already for more weird videos. Number 4. Kiera Kohls. The last time Kiera Kohls was seen, it was October 2nd, 2018. At the time, she was 3 months pregnant and 26 years old. She was also employed as a United States postal worker. She vanished on the south side of Chicago, her car out front of her apartment with a packed lunch and a cell phone sitting on one of the seats. Nobody had any clue where she went, why she would have left her phone in her car, or who could have possibly taken her in broad daylight in front of her own home. The most tragic part about this case is that police haven't been a very big help. Kiera's own mother believes that her boyfriend may have had something to do with it, as Kiera had been dating the father of her unborn baby for 6 years, and after her disappearance, he vanished. Kiera's mother suspects he could have something to do with the case, but the police won't make any comments about it. In 2020, the case was considered inactive. But by 2021, NBC Chicago reported the case changed to being an ongoing investigation with foul play suspected. Number 3. The Big Gray Man. In 1925, hiker, professor, and a member of the Royal Geographical Society gave an account of a mysterious incident that occurred on the summit of Ben Macdui, Scotland, several decades earlier in 1891. He claimed that as he was returning from the summit, he heard something else walking behind him. He never physically saw anyone through the mist, but did say that he would never go back to Ben Macdui ever again. There were other reports of similar things happening in the area around the same time, with hikers claiming that they heard slow footsteps as if being followed. Nobody ever actually saw something until the 1940s. It was during the 40s that hikers began to come forward, saying that they'd witnessed a large figure in the mist with long, dark hair. The creature came to be known as the Big Gray Man. Nobody knows if the Big Gray Man really exists. Nonetheless, dozens of hikers, both locals and internationals, have heard footsteps while climbing Ben Macdui and experienced a sense of being followed, along with a terrible foreboding. But there has never been a plausible explanation put forward, nor has there been any evidence of a creature living on the mountain. To this day, nobody knows why people hear these noises or what it is they truly see out in the fog. Number 2. Moira Elizalde. Moira Elizalde vanished on the day before Thanksgiving in 2015 in Dallas, Texas. It had been a festive time, with Maria's mother preparing Thanksgiving dinner for the whole family. But Maria and her sisters began to get bored. They wanted to go outside and play with the neighbors. They left their house at about 7:30 p.m., they were seen playing in the yard at about 9, and when they were called to come back into the house, only 2 of them returned. Maria vanished from the front yard without a trace. As you can imagine, Maria's mother was panicked. She called for her daughter, she checked with the neighbors, and even managed to get surveillance footage from cameras on the street. But nobody knew where Maria went. Train stations were checked, police were called, an investigation ensued, and not a single lead has come about since. Even 6 years later, nobody has seen Maria. The girl was only 15 years old. Police were initially wondering if perhaps the child had run away, but if she had, you'd think she would have at least given her mother a call sometime during the last 6 years. After all, kids usually only run away for a couple of weeks at a time, maximum. Her sisters never saw anyone suspicious, and to be quite frank, there really is no explanation. One second she was standing in her front yard, and the next, she was a ghost. Number 1. Boston Heist Painting. It was March 18th, 1990, when 13 works of art valued at around $500 million were stolen from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. It's one of the greatest art thefts in history, and famous because nobody has ever been caught for the crime. In the morning, guards admitted 2 men pretending to be police officers responding to a 911 call. They were actually thieves who quickly tied up the guards and then looted the museum over the next 60 minutes. They stole paintings, a couple of artifacts, and the Storm on the Sea of Galilee, one of the most famous and valuable Rembrandt paintings ever. 13 works of art in all were stolen, and not a single person has been held responsible. So far as the FBI is concerned, the robbery was likely planned by a criminal organization. The only problem is that they don't know which organization was involved. There was no physical evidence, interrogations turned up nothing, undercover informants were given no information, and all sting operations failed. To this day, nobody knows who robbed all these paintings or where the paintings are now. Number 10. Roman Unic. In an absolutely bizarre discovery out of North Yorkshire in the United Kingdom, archaeologists dug up the ancient remains of a eunuch who had once been part of the Roman population. The eunuch was discovered bedazzled with jewelry buried in what experts believe is women's clothing, and completely castrated, probably by himself during an excruciating religious ceremony. The dig came about because of a bypass that was being constructed to serve as a link between London and Hadrian's Wall. Archaeologists found elaborate paintings, an ancient Roman motel, and of course, the strange eunuch priest. He was buried with 2 pebbles stuffed in his mouth, something done by members of the cult of Cybele. The stones were symbolic, a hope that in death he would have the manhood that he robbed from himself given back. But here's what's so crazy about the discovery. His body proved that there were many mystical religions from the Far East active in Roman Britain during the 4th century. This is solidified by other bizarre finds, such as a castration clamp that was recently pulled out of the Thames River. To date, the eunuch priest is the only man who's ever been found wearing such an array of jewelry in Britain. And why he decided to snip himself for his cult is because the devotees to Cybele wanted to model themselves after the lover of their goddess, Attis, who himself became a eunuch as a self-punishment for having an affair. Number 9. Creepy bug fossil. The creepiest fossil in the world was just found in Scotland. The fossil is that of a millipede, which, according to the study done by members of the University of Texas, may be the oldest bug in the entire world. The millipede dates back 425 million years and is older than any other fossil discovered of any other insect, creepy crawly, or arachnid. It's about 75 million years younger than any other millipede found. And while researchers admit there could be older fossils of bugs out there, they have not found them yet. Thanks to this fossil, scientists have concluded that bugs likely evolved much more quickly than previously thought. They now believe that insects went from hanging around lakes and shorelines to occupying forests and creating complex ecosystems of their own in only 40 million years. Researchers say that there was a rapid evolution that began at the water's edge, spread to nearby areas, and soon went worldwide. And it may have started with this tiny, seemingly insignificant, and undoubtedly creepy millipede. The thing is that scientists have found other bug deposits dating just 20 million years after the millipede. But add another 20 million years onto that, and scientists have found evidence of forests ripe with a multitude of bizarre insects and spiders. But what happened between the emergence of the millipede and the establishment of forest ecosystems is still an utter mystery. Number 8. Ancient Chinese tombs. Tombs have been uncovered in ancient China that are beyond creepy. About 500 artifacts have been saved from the ancient tombs, all of which date back about 2,700 years before today. The tombs were found in the Shanxi province, containing many amazing cultural relics built from a variety of materials, such as jade, copper, gold, and bamboo. There were 9 tombs discovered, all of which were about medium-sized. Many of the bronze wares that were found, things like pots and bowls, still had legible inscriptions on them in ancient Chinese characters. One of the oddest discoveries came in the form of cat paws. The archaeologists apparently found strange golden ornaments shaped like cat paws, and nobody really knows what they were used for. But who did these creepy tombs belong to? They were created to be the eternal resting place of nobles who lived during what is now known as the Spring and Autumn period of China, between 770 and 476 BCE. However, archaeologists did not divulge whether they had actually discovered any bodies. Right now, it's believed that the tombs were already pillaged by grave robbers by the time archaeologists got there, meaning no bones and no bodies. Number 7. Chan Chan statues. The Chan Chan statues are some of the strangest things ever excavated in Peru. They were found at the largest pre-Columbian site anywhere in the Americas, the Chan Chan Archaeological Site. This place was once the capital of the legendary Chamu Kingdom, which actually came before the powerful Inca Empire. The ancient city, known as Trujillo, thrived as a budding metropolis between the years 900 and 1450, far from the altitude of the Andes Mountains, near the northernmost coast of Peru. But what about these statues? About 20 of them were found by Patricia Balbueno and her team of archaeologists. They were found literally buried in soil at the entrance of one of the largest temple complexes in the ancient city. They were once part of a corridor leading to a ceremonial courtyard. The statues were probably used to mark the tombs of very important people. When someone would walk through the corridor, all these creepy little statues would stare back at them. There were likely many more statues when the city was prosperous over 1,000 years ago, but now there are only about 20 left. At its height, the Chan Chan Archaeological Site probably boasted at least 30,000 inhabitants. The city center is about 2.3 square miles. The suburbs are significantly larger. The first foreign eyes to see the city were back in 1532. Most of the city was eventually looted. An archaeological dig in the 16th century even found a doorway made of solid silver that would have been worth about $2 million today. Number 6. Shipwreck artifacts. Shipwrecks are mysterious enough without being full of creepy artifacts. But a vessel was recently discovered off the coast of England, and scientists can't quite wrap their heads around a collection of mysterious artifacts. Now, Historic England is using high-resolution X-ray scanners to properly analyze the artifacts and see just what these weird things are. Let's back it up to the actual shipwreck. The vessel is known as the Rus Wujik, and it sank off the coast of Kent way back in 1740. At the time, it was filled with trading goods, such as silver coins and metallic thimbles. But underwater archaeologists also discovered that there may have been some smuggling going on. They found coins that had actually been sewn into people's clothing. The best guess is that some ordinary people working on the ship got a little too handsy with the treasure and stitched the coins into their apparel to keep them hidden. But even though archaeologists have identified coins and other artifacts from the wreckage, there are still some objects that they can't identify without using the most advanced X-ray scanners because the objects have become covered in concretions. Or in other words, they've become covered in hard mineral deposits. So we will still have to wait a while before some of the more obscure treasure is identified. Number 5. Colonial Tavern. In North Carolina, archaeologists were examining a colonial tavern from the 18th century. They were shocked to discover that the building had burned down in the 1760s, causing the walls of the structure to collapse. Because of the walls collapsing, the basement of the tavern was sealed like a time capsule. Nobody had entered the space until Dr. Charles Ewan and his team of researchers from East Carolina University stumbled upon it. Beneath the foundations of the colonial tavern, the students found evidence that the building had once been used as a brothel. They found smoking pipes, brass taps from wine barrels, and a whole lot of artifacts that had probably belonged to ladies of the evening, such as clothing fasteners and straight pins. They even found an Irish halfpenny dated back to 1766. The consensus had been that the tavern doubled as a brothel, which may have been operating out of the basement. This would explain all the suspicious paraphernalia. If you're wondering how such a discovery can go unmade in the United States until just now, it's because the tavern was only discovered recently thanks to ground-penetrating radar. After the accidental fire burned the tavern/brothel to the ground, it literally got covered up. The scientists had to dig the remains of the building out of the ground, uncovering like some kind of ancient Egyptian tomb. Number 4. Neanderthal bodies. Archaeologists recently discovered the very creepy ancient remains of 9 Neanderthals near Rome, according to Italy's culture ministry. The oldest of the bodies dates back to between 90,000 and 100,000 years old. The bodies were uncovered inside a prehistoric cave. However, you can hardly call them bodies. They were more like fossilized bones. Scientists found fragments of skull and shattered jawbones, and they say the remains belong to 7 men, 1 woman, and 1 child. But here's the creepy part of the discovery. According to Mario Rolfo, a professor of archaeology working closely with the excavations, the Neanderthals had probably not been living in the cave. On the contrary, they had probably been killed by wild hyenas and then dragged back to the cave, which the hyenas actually lived in, before being eaten as dog food. Back when Neanderthals were still pitiful cave people, they had a bit of a harder time defending themselves against prowling animals, and hyenas were especially keen on hunting down ancient humans and eating them. Specifically, they would hunt infants and elderly people, or even those who were sick. Number 3. Spiderweb masks. The traditional masks made from the indigenous people of Malekula are strange, creepy, and very cool. Malekula is the 2nd largest island of Vanuatu, which itself is an island nation deep in the South Pacific Ocean. The island was left pretty much alone for most of the colonial expansion that took place before the 20th century. This allowed the indigenous people here to preserve a lot of their traditions. One of their traditions was making cloth out of spider webs, specifically cloth from the golden silk orb weaver. The tribespeople would go to the forest and collect raw webs until they had enough that they could mold them into bizarre masks. These masks would often have scary, almost demonic faces painted on them. They would sometimes be equipped with boar tusks, and sometimes clay was added to make the faces even more frightening. There are not many of these masks left today. Some have been retrieved from the island and brought to various museums around the world. But what's really shocking is that scientists can't quite figure out what the masks were used for. Some experts have called them suffocating hoods. Early visitors to the South Pacific Islands believed that the masks were used to kill widows at the funerals of their husbands. They would put the mask on, which, because of the way it was made, would suffocate them. This was probably not the case, though, because the Malekulan society is still so isolated, it's not like anybody can just go ask. Scientists believe the masks do serve a ceremonial function, they just don't know what it is. Number 2. Mass moat grave. In the Netherlands, researchers have unearthed a mass grave of what they believe to be medieval skeletons. It all happened when city workers began to excavate a moat. They found the bodies of men between the ages of 15 and 30, all of whom lived near the end of the Middle Ages. Additionally, rusty nails were collected from around the skeletons, suggesting they had been buried inside of boxes. Unfortunately, scientists don't quite understand what this means. The moat being excavated surrounds the famous Botstein Castle. Nobody had thought it would be riddled with corpses. They first found 9 skeletons, but within another few hours had bumped up the total to 20. Archaeologists are now saying there could be even more skeletons all throughout the ancient moat. But here's what makes it a bit creepy. Normally, when there are buried bodies, there are grave goods. But in this case, archaeologists haven't found anything of worth. This is pointed to a mass murder. It's quite likely that a large group of people had been killed, stuffed into boxes, and then tossed into the moat to rot. Nobody knows why this happened or who was killed. It's a miracle they even found the bones in the first place. Number 1. Anti-Witchcraft Potion. Angeline Tubbs is also known as the Witch of Saratoga. She was born in the year 1761 inside of a small pub called the Star and Garter Inn, located in Northamptonshire. She left England at the age of 15, moved to America, and began to tell fortunes. Legends say she was followed around by cats and was in fact a very real witch. She also apparently lived to be 104 years old. Now, in the house that Angeline Tubbs was born in, the current owner recently discovered a bottle from the 1800s used as an anti-witchcraft potion. The bottle was found while the owner of the building was doing roof repairs. But what's really strange is that the bottle was probably made sometime in the 1830s, long after the alleged witch had already fled to America. What this suggests is that the people living in Angeline's birthplace were still so scared of witches that they created an anti-witchcraft potion to ward off the evil stain of Angeline's birth. The bottle then sat in the chimney for nearly 200 years, providing supposed protection against evil spells. But what was inside the bottle, you ask? It contained fish hooks, glass, human teeth, and a disgusting, unidentified liquid. Which of these creepy discoveries freaked you out the most? Number 10. Surprise Snake. Imagine this. You're going fishing, expecting to pull up a massive catch and test yourself against the creatures under the water. But you pull up a big salmon or a cod or something else, and inside the fish mouth, something falls out that could kill you in an instant. That recently happened. One of the weirdest things ever found inside of an animal was, in fact, a snake that was discovered by a fisherman inside of a fish's mouth. Imagine his surprise when he reeled in a cod, pulled the fish into his boat, and then discovered one of the deadliest snakes in the world sitting inside. This horrifying thing happened to Andy Wharton while fishing near Melville Island in the Northern Territory of Australia. Somehow, the fish had managed to eat a spotted black snake, one of the most venomous serpents in the entire country. Lucky for the fisherman, the cod had done a pretty good job of killing the snake already. He was able to pry it out of the fish's mouth without getting bitten because the snake was already dead. It just hadn't made it into the fish's belly just yet. The fisherman threw the venomous snake back into the water and kept the fish. Though, to be honest, if that had been me, I probably would have just thrown the whole situation back into the water and called it a day. Number 9. 32 rubber ducks. A dog in Thailand got a little too hungry when playing with what he thought were his toys. The dog managed to eat not one, not two, but 32 rubber ducks, at which point he needed emergency surgery to get them removed from his belly. What did he think he was doing? Seriously. An emergency veterinarian discovered the 32 toys inside of the American Bulldog after its owner realized that he had raided a box of yellow ducks that she bought the day before to decorate her pool. A huge portion of the ducks were missing, and she immediately realized that her dog had gobbled them up. At the veterinarian clinic, x-rays revealed all the little yellow ducks trapped inside of the dog's guts. The dog had vomited up 5.5 yellow ducks already, but still needed surgery to remove the remainder. It was having a very tough time, so the surgeons pulled out each yellow duck one by one during a surgery that lasted for about an hour. But the rubber ducks weren't the only things inside the dog's stomach. The veterinarians also pulled out 2 chunks of rubber balls and a cow skin snack that hadn't been digested. After waking up from the anesthetic, the bulldog was right back to his normal self, and I'm happy to say that he made a full recovery. I hope he learned a valuable lesson about not eating everything he sees, but who am I kidding? He probably went right back to eating plastic. You know what they say, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Number 8. Head in the shark. A group of fishermen in the Philippines caught a massive tiger shark that weighed over 650 pounds or 300 kilograms. It was an exceptional catch, and everyone in the group was very excited. But excitement turned to horror when the fishermen discovered a human head inside of the shark's guts. Not only that, but they also found somebody's leg partially digested inside of the great shark. Being the superstitious lot that they are, the men threw the leg and the head, along with everything except for the shark's fins and jaw, overboard out of fear that human remains and tainted shark meat would bring them bad luck. Of course, this was probably not the right thing to do. The shark was probably responsible for a murder, and the head probably should have been turned over to the authorities. Locals say the shark may have eaten 1 or 2 missing passengers from a ferry that had sunk nearby just a few weeks earlier. But now that the head is probably decomposing at the bottom of the ocean somewhere, it's unlikely the identity of the victim will ever be uncovered. What would you do in this situation? I can't blame the fishermen for panicking and throwing the whole thing overboard, to be honest. Number 7. 64 pounds of plastic. A sperm whale was found washed up dead on a beach in Spain. This in itself isn't the wildest news ever. After all, whales get beached all the time, especially whales that are already dead and get washed up on the shore. But this whale proved to have something disturbing inside of it. An autopsy revealed that the whale had swallowed roughly 64 pounds or 30 kilograms of plastic before it died. The autopsy was carried out by experts at the Elizalde Wildlife Rescue Center. They say that the whale was unable to digest or pass any of the plastic that was in its system. Because of this, the plastic clogged its digestive system. Think about flushing too much toilet paper down the toilet and the paper clogging the pipes. That's basically what happened here. Nothing else could get past the plastic and into the whale's digestive system, which caused an infection of the stomach lining that ultimately resulted in the death of the animal. This is obviously tragic and something that will be happening more and more frequently as more plastics find its way into the water. This whale died of starvation because it had accidentally swallowed so much plastic that its digestive system became clogged like someone's arteries who eats too much McDonald's. Let this be a reminder to all of us not to litter, especially not with plastic. It often makes its way down into the ocean where it causes animals all types of problems. Number 6. Snake eggs. Villagers in Nigeria recently harvested some very strange and slimy balls that they found inside of a colossal dead snake. You may have seen photos of this snake before. With its belly cut open, the snake looks like it had 1,000 Kinder Surprises in its stomach. But they weren't chocolate treats. Instead, they were slimy eggs which happened to be a rare delicacy in the region. But why did the villagers cut the snake open in the first place? The serpent was murdered by locals after they suspected it ate a calf. They thought the snake had ate a baby cow because its stomach was so swollen. But then when they carved the slithering reptile open, they found out it was just pregnant. Not wanting to waste the opportunity, the eggs were harvested and later devoured. Would you eat snake eggs? They kind of gross me out. I'll stick with plain chicken eggs for now. Or have any of you eaten them lately? Are they any good? As for what kind of snake it was, experts say it was probably an African rock python, a breed of snake that can grow to be over 24 feet or 7 meters in length, and that enjoys preying on human animals such as goats and crocodiles. Number 5. Woman's engagement ring. This story is real, as ridiculous as it sounds, and yes, human beings are animals just like any other animal. And this particular human being did something totally bizarre and hilarious. Jenna Evans dreamed that she was with her fiancé fighting bad guys on a speeding train. During their struggle, Jenna's fiancé told her that she needed to swallow her engagement ring to keep it away from the bad people. So she did as he suggested. But when she woke up from her dream, she realized that she had swallowed her engagement ring in real life. She had slurped the ring right off her finger in her sleep. And when she went to urgent care and told the doctor what happened, they used x-rays to find her engagement ring nestled neatly in her stomach. This is obviously not something that anyone wants to find inside of themselves, and rather than go through all the trouble of having the surgery, the gastroenterologist simply suggested that she go home and allow nature to take its course. They thought she would simply get the ring back in a few days, a little dirtier and a little stinkier. However, neither Jenna nor her fiancé were very keen on what that meant, and so they convinced the doctor to perform an endoscopy. The doc removed the ring, gave it a thorough washing, and everything was back to normal. But the story remains, and it's something I'm sure no one wants to happen to them. Have you ever swallowed something that you had to have surgery to remove? Or know anyone that did? What was it? What happened? Tell me about it in the comments below. Then remember to subscribe to Talltanic if you haven't already for more incredible videos. Number 4. Mysterious ant species. A new species of tropical ant was found inside a frog. If that sounds unusual, that's because it is. Discovering a new species is usually quite a process. But according to National Geographic, scientists found the new species of ant inside of a poison frog known as the little devil frog or the diablito in Ecuador. This frog is bright orange, very poisonous, and it loves eating ants. And because the poison frog hunts bugs in places where scientists don't usually go, scientists have figured out that if they capture wild frogs and check the contents of their stomachs, they can sometimes find treasure. In this case, they got lucky and found an entirely new species. The new species is a mysterious ant that scientists are still trying to analyze. It apparently lives in the rainforests of Ecuador, invisible to all except the voracious poison frog and its long tongue. And if you're curious as to how exactly researchers got the ant out of the frog's stomach, they used a soft tube. The soft tube goes into the frog's mouth, water is gently poured through the tube, and then as water fills the frog's stomach, whatever it ate last flows up and out of its mouth and into a tray. The frog is then safely returned to wherever they took it from. That seems like torture to me, but I suppose for frogs it's okay? Number 3. Turtles in a crocodile. 3 turtles were saved from the belly of a crocodile during a video that was made to show how to hunt and cook crocodiles in the forest. The hunters were filmed tracking down a crocodile, only about 4 or 5 feet or 1.5 meters in length. The catching of the reptile was easy enough. It was when the hunters went to the river to begin clearing the guts out of the ferocious predator that they stumbled upon some innocent bystanders. Upon opening the stomach, a tiny turtle popped its head out as if it had just been taking a nap. The hunters removed the turtle and continued to prepare the crocodile. And much to their surprise, they found 2 additional turtles. The turtles were completely unscathed. They had probably been swallowed whole by the crocodile and were waiting to be digested. Even though the crocodile ended up becoming food for the evening, the trio of turtles were saved and returned to the river. Lucky for the turtles, not so lucky for the crocodile. Number 2. Nails in a cow. A farmer was having some trouble with his cow. She was bloated, acting a little strange, and not eating properly. So the farmer eventually decided it was time to perform surgery to see what was bothering her. After opening the first stomach, the surgeon discovered a couple of pebbles. That wasn't totally out of the ordinary. It was when the second, smaller stomach was opened that a handful of larger pebbles were found along with a couple of nails. As it turned out, the cow had somehow accidentally swallowed nails, and one of them got embedded into her stomach. Just imagine having a nail stabbing into your guts. It would be absolute agony. This explained why the cow had been so bloated and ornery. The nails were removed, the stomachs were put back in place, and the cow went on to make a very acceptable recovery. Number 1. Fish thief. A snorkeler in Australia made a rather bizarre discovery, not inside of a fish, but rather wrapped around one. Susan Pryor came across a fish with a gold ring stuck around its neck, like a fishy dog collar. She was snorkeling on Norfolk Island when she saw the mysterious little fish. Susan figures the fish probably got itself stuck inside the ring while searching for food on the floor of the ocean. The ring itself probably belonged to a man who had lost his wedding ring earlier in the year. The guy actually came forward after seeing the pictures of the fish wearing his very expensive wedding ring on Susan's social media. He said he had lost the piece of jewelry while swimming with his wife. But here's the issue. Trying to catch a particular fish is no easy job. Not to mention, everyone in the area now knows that there's a fish swimming around with a solid gold necklace. There's been no word yet if anyone has found the ring, but something tells me that the guy who lost it is down there every day trying to get his hands on it. After all, that's a lot of money to give away to a fish you hardly even know, don't you think? What's the weirdest thing your pet has ever accidentally eaten? Let me know in the comments, and thank you for watching. If you haven't already, be sure to hit subscribe for more awesome videos.